We're going to start out in John 19, verse 1. Pilate then took Yeshua and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and put a purple robe on him. And they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and to give him slaps in the face. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Yeshua then came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify! Crucify!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him and said, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium again and said to Yeshua, "Where are you from?" But Yeshua gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You do not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you, and I have the authority to crucify you?" Yeshua answered, "You have no authority over me unless it has been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Yeshua out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in the Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So then he handed him over to them to be crucified. It's a scary passage. The thing that really makes it scary is when we realize Peter made the profession, I'll go with you and I will even die with you. I love you. And then denied him 3 times. The question is, at what point would we remove our allegiance from God to some human master? Okay. Think about the story of Lazarus and the rich man. You know, we all have to contemplate the fact that we're going to die. We have ideas about how our life ought to be, and when it doesn't go the way we think it ought to, it goes worse, we often have questions. We wonder, is God really with me? Does he really love me? You know, what's going on? Okay, and that question is one of allegiance. When Lazarus was begging outside of the rich man's house, I dare say he didn't really expect to die of starvation. And you think about it, starvation is one of the most horrible ways to die. Okay, disease is bad, starvation is like disease plus. Okay, and in those days you didn't have anything to relieve the symptoms of it. Was God faithful to Lazarus? Mm-hmm. He was. Because the rest of the story is he goes to paradise. Okay? He's going to be with God in eternity. He'll be in the kingdom. We'll get to meet him. How do we face things like that? I mean, you lose your job, things are going badly, hurricanes blow your house apart, all kinds of tests. Okay? When do you change your allegiance? And the thing is, you don't. God is king of the universe. And you look back at what Job had to say. Well, in fact, we're going to go to Job in a minute. There's no point at which we change allegiance. And we know that in the last days, when the Antichrist has control of everything, apparently, and you won't be able to buy or sell or get food without taking his mark, the question is, are you willing to die? Are you willing to die of starvation? Okay. It's easy if someone's just going to do like they do in the Orient, where they just get you needle down, shoot you in the back of the head. That's simple. That's easy. Okay, starving to death over a long period, that's going to be hard. And that's the tactic that's going to be used. Okay. The beheading, no, that's pretty easy unless they decide to do it with a steak knife. Okay, the French really took that to an art form with the guillotine. It was painless. You didn't get to feel anything. Okay, but there are worse ways to die. Wrong way.
I think it would be worse to watch your children and family starve than to starve yourself.
That's true. That's very true. And that will be a big part of the tactic.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Job and start in chapter 1. We'll read a little bit there.
What about those who believe the rapture will happen before tribulation?
They've got a big surprise coming. Yes, and I really feel for their faith, because they're going to think they're not going to be in it, and when they realize that they are, the whole foundation of their faith is going to be questioned. There was a man in the land of Uz named Job. That man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very large household. That man was wealthier than anyone in the East. Okay, so Job starts off in a pretty good place. By the way, when it says he's blameless, a lot of our English translations will say he was perfect. Well, you're not perfect in the sense of absolute perfection like God. I actually had a high school teacher trying to tell me that that's exactly what it meant. No, he was blameless according to the law. Okay, he didn't break the laws. Doesn't mean he had every perfect thought every day of his life. Okay, that's just in the realm of unreality. But he didn't do anything bad that was against the law, because the Torah is the test of holiness. Now, Job is supposed to be older than the book of Genesis. Okay, Job probably predates Abraham. Okay, so he didn't have the Torah as Moses had it. Okay, but still people knew the law of God. They knew the principles. Abraham was chosen because God said he would raise up his children to walk in God's ways and teach them justice. Okay, that's why he was chosen as a patriarch, is because he would pass it on. It's not that there weren't other righteous men, but he was going to be the one that would pass it on. Okay, so there was knowledge there that we quite often don't take account of. Noah precedes Moses, right?
Right.
Did he know clean and unclean? Yeah. He had to separate the animals. Okay, so just because it wasn't written down and preserved for us till today doesn't mean people didn't know it. Okay, but going on from there.
I thought it was interesting that the name Job means hostile or penitent.
Or penitent?
Hostile or penitent.
That's interesting.
That's totally in contrast what we think of as Job and most of the other people that we know what their names mean. It fits them.
Well, if his name means hostile, think about what's it say? He said he shunned evil. He was hostile towards evil, but he was also a penitent man when it came to dealing with God.
Yeah.
He wanted to do what was right.
Right.
So it may have a specialized meaning that it's kind of hard to translate.
Well, I think those are good answers.
Okay. Well, I try for a good answer. I don't always get there, but I'll give it my best shot. It was the custom of his sons to hold feasts, each on his set day in his own home. They would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When around the feast days was over, Job would send word to them to sanctify themselves, and rising early in the morning, he would make burnt offerings, one for each of them. For Job thought, "Perhaps my children have sinned and blasphemed God in their thoughts." This is what Job always used to do. One day the divine beings presented themselves before Yahweh, and the adversary came among them. Okay, now if you read this in the Hebrew, it's B'nai Ha-Elohim, sons of God. Okay, and we quite often go, wait a minute, I thought there was only one son of God. Any being that is a direct creation of God is called a son of God.
Is it the angels and the devil?
The angels are direct creations, and they were called sons of God. Okay, Adam was called a son of God, but that's in a different way from Yeshua being the son of God. Okay, Yeshua is not.
S and Son of God is capital S. What I've read.
Well, that's supplied by the English translators.
Well, yeah, but
Okay.
that's because it's true.
Yeah. What my point here is, they're talking about them being divine beings. Okay, obviously they're not gods. Okay, but they're using the term divine beings, and this is JPS, by the way. There are some Messianic rabbis who really shy away from the whole concept of the Trinity and the deity of Yeshua. And what they will do to pull the wool over your eyes about where they stand is that they'll say Yeshua is divine. What they're doing is they're dodging the word deity. So they're calling him a divine being. Well, the angels are quote-unquote divine beings. So what they're doing is they're trying to lower his status without letting you know that they're lowering his status. Because in our mind, divine means God, but they're using it in a specialized way to not say what they don't want you to hear. Okay. Anyway. Okay, and the adversary, of course, Satan is who he's talking about here. Yahweh said to the adversary, "Where have you been?" The adversary answered Yahweh, "I've been roaming all over the earth." The Lord said to the adversary, "Have you noticed my servant Job? There was no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil." The adversary answered Yahweh, "Does Job have good reason to fear God?" Why? It is because you have fenced him around, him and his household and all that he has. You have blessed his efforts so that his possessions spread out in the land, but lay your hand upon all that he has, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face. Yahweh replied to the adversary, "See, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on him." The adversary departed from the presence of Yahweh. Now we're going to see what the adversary does. One day, as his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the she-asses were grazing alongside them, when Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off, and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." This one was still speaking when another came and said, "God's fire fell from heaven, took hold of the sheep and the boys, and burned them up. I alone have escaped to tell you." This one was still speaking when another came and said, "A Chaldean formation of 3 columns made a raid on the camels and carried them off, and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." This one was still speaking when another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, when suddenly a mighty wind came from the wilderness. It struck the 4 corners of the house, so that it collapsed upon the young people, and they died. I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, cut off his hair, and threw himself on the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I came out of my mother's womb, naked shall I return there. Yahweh has given, and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh." For all that, Job did not sin, nor did he cast a reproach on God. Okay, he just lost everything, even his kids. Okay, and we wonder sometimes how in the cosmic plan life and death play out. Okay, God has a bigger view of things than we do. Okay, people died. Okay, it says in Corinthians that we are a spectacle before the angels, and the word spectacle there carries the word of being a theater. What happens on earth is actually, in a sense, a kind of a play that's being used to educate the angels about righteousness and grace. Evidently, there are things they don't understand that we do. I'm not sure exactly how all that plays out, but they don't understand what God is doing, and God is teaching them. And sometimes we play into that plan. In fact, I think we constantly play into that plan because God tests us, and the question is, how do we respond? Okay. But so far, Job is doing well. One day, the divine beings presented themselves before Yahweh. The adversary came along with them to present himself before Yahweh. Yahweh said to the adversary, "Where have you been?" The adversary answered Yahweh, "I have been roaming all over the earth." Yahweh said to the adversary, "Have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. He still keeps his integrity, so you have incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason." The adversary said to Yahweh, "Skin for skin. All that a man has he will give up for his life. But lay a hand on his bones and his flesh, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face." So Yahweh said to the adversary, "See, he is in your power, only spare his life." The adversary departed from the presence of Yahweh and inflicted a severe inflammation on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He took a potsherd to scratch himself as he sat in the ashes. His wife said to him, "Do you still keep your integrity? Blaspheme God and die." But he said to her, "You talk as a shameless woman might talk. Should we accept only good from God and not accept evil?" For all that, Job said nothing sinful. When Job's 3 friends heard about all these calamities that had befallen him, each of them came from his home: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They met together to go and console and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could not recognize him, and they broke into loud weeping. Each one tore his robe and threw dust into the air onto his head. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. None spoke a word to him, for they saw how great was his suffering.
Some comfort people.
What?
Some comfort people.
Hmm.
Well, it's pretty comforting to have somebody sitting there with you, though. If they ended up telling you the reason you
Yeah, well, we haven't gotten there yet. Yeah. They wind up being very discomforting because they keep trying to throw the blame on Job. John?
Where they speak blameless and integrity, one of the word groupings is that integrity is, you say, these are my morals, your values are what you practice, and when the two are together, that's when you have integrity. In other words, what you say and what you do match up.
Mm-hmm.
So hence blameless.
Exactly. Integrity is everything working together in the same direction. You can be completely evil and be a man of integrity because everything's working towards one goal. Okay. Now, the question is, Job gets tested out of the blue. Do you think Job ever went through any testings in his life before this? I'm sure he did.
Oh, sure, everybody.
Yeah, everybody does. The thing is, God is using those testings to make us strong enough so when the day comes that we face death or suffering like Job, that we know God is there. God is behind it. God is for us. And the testing gets tougher and tougher and tougher the older you get, because the more you grow in faith, the stronger you are to face the trials. Okay? So if you're going through testing, realize it's there for a reason. God is not just plucking the wings off of flies when He tests us. He's doing it to make us stronger. He can't, and when God tests you in something, He can't tell you what He's testing you for, because otherwise you'll just give Him outward conformity. Or someone wanting patience or needing to learn patience. God doesn't say to them, okay, I'm going to teach you patience, because the person then just begins to play like they're patient. They're not actually patient. God wants the thing to be real from the heart. So you have to learn the lesson without knowing what the lesson is. So when you conform yourself to the nature of God in that test, then the test can end because you've learned. Sometimes you don't learn, and you have to go through the same test over and over and over again until you finally take it to heart and do things God's way. Life itself is a test. Think about it. When you start out young, most people start out young and healthy. And as they get older, things start to break down. Okay? Anybody who's over 60 understands how things start breaking down. Okay, you start getting weaker. Your bones start getting weaker. You get tired easily. You used to work 12 hours and not think a thing about it. Now you need a nap just to work 10. Okay? And then when you look out at the world, it starts going gray and you go, wait, what? I can't quite see as good as I used to. Can you say that again? Huh? Yeah.
You get illnesses out of the I had shingles in my 50s, cellulitis a few years ago. I never would have changed anything like that. They were painful.
Yes, and a lot of these things are painful. Illness can be very painful. Okay, if you've never had a gout attack, trust me, you don't want one. Gout. Yeah, it's very painful. I think my brother might have finally gotten a little experience of that this past couple of weeks. I had it one time where I couldn't walk for 6 weeks, and that's not fun. Anyway, the thing is, just getting older is a test in which you learn to be patient and put your trust in God to take care of you. But in the end, how many of us are going to die?
All of us.
All of us.
As far as I know.
Your life will prepare you to face that final test, which is death. When it comes time to die, will you die with Yahweh as your declared king and master, who you trust to take you through death into the kingdom? Or will you turn away and just curse death?
Is it death or transition? I prefer transition.
Well, I don't care what you call it.
Yep.
The death is a transition, and death is death also. Your body dies to be resurrected later. Okay, but the thing is, do you just hate the evil, or do you try and add good in at that point? Okay, as you're facing death, are you telling your relatives who are with you and your friends that are with you about the goodness and grace of God? Or are you just cursing the evil of death? Okay, there are people. Anybody here seen? What was that movie? Robin Williams played a doctor.
Yes, the movie where the wife was the only one that lived and everybody died, all of his family died.
I don't know.
Working psychiatrist plays and everybody was.
Yeah, he starts out in the psych ward, and he realizes that he has to do something positive. But anyway, he goes into a room where the man is dying, and nurses come in. He throws the food at him. He's just bitter and angry that he's going to die. And Robin Williams goes into the room, and he just mocks the whole thing. He comes in, he's dressed up like the angel of death, and he starts just throwing out everything you can think of that's called death. Kick the bucket, take the eternal dirt nap, eat warm food. And he starts throwing all this stuff at the guy until finally the guy starts to laugh. And he gets with it, and he just starts playing this. And eventually what he does is he turns the guy's mind around from just being bitter about dying to wanting to love his family and actually express that to them before he dies. Yeah, he didn't want to die, but his attitude towards death changed. Anyway, the name of the movie is the name of the doctor who eventually started free clinics around the world. And his idea was everybody's a doctor and everybody's a patient. You come here, I'll help you, I'll add what good I can into your life, and you'll add what good you can into my life. Okay, and literally thousands of doctors around the world wrote to him and said, how can I be a part of this? This is what I want to do in medicine. What they're doing in medicine with the hospital and the governments, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people. Okay, and not for a big paycheck. They wanted to do good. Okay, and someday the name of that movie will come back to me, but it's a work.
That sounds like a good
It is. But in the whole thing, of life, there's always suffering. The question is, how do you face it? Because we can't see what's on the other side of the test. We're not allowed to see that. It's strictly faith in God that He's doing something good. Okay? I was going to read a passage out of Book of Mysteries by Jonathan Cahn, but I don't want to take the time to do that right now.
Oh, do it.
Oh, do it.
Do it. Okay, I'll do it. Backed by popular demand, Jonathan Cahn is... Okay, this is page 193, called the Emmanuel Solution. It was early in the evening, just after dinner. The teacher and I were sitting by the campfire along with others. He was holding a cup. An empty cup, he said. How do we get rid of its emptiness? There's only one way. By filling it. So the teacher went over to the fountain and filled the cup with water. We have successfully removed the emptiness, he said with a slight smile. Not by focusing on the emptiness or by concentrating on removing it. We remove the emptiness by simply filling the cup with water. A simple solution, yet profound, even revolutionary when you apply it to life. How did God accomplish salvation? By removing evil from the world? No. By His presence. By coming into the world. By becoming God with us, Emmanuel. By pouring water into the cup, I said. Exactly. He didn't take away our problems or remove them from the world. He did something better. He gave us the answer. He poured the answer into the world. You see, salvation is not the absence of sin, it's the presence of God. Salvation is not the removing of the world's darkness, it's the shining of God's light into the darkness, and by the light, the darkness is driven away. Salvation is the incarnation of God. It's His presence. It's Yeshua. It's the Emmanuel solution. So what does it reveal? You don't overcome the darkness by focusing on the darkness. You overcome the darkness by focusing on the light. Yes, and you don't overcome sin by dwelling on sin. You overcome sin by dwelling not on the sin, but on God. You overcome emptiness by dwelling on His presence. You solve the problem not by dwelling on your problem, but by dwelling on the answer, by being filled with the answer. You overcome sorrow by the presence of joy, and hate by the presence of love, and evil by the presence of good. Apply this secret and it will change your life. Overcome the absence by the presence of its opposite. It's as simple and as deep as pouring water into a cup, the Emmanuel solution. The mission? Apply this day the Emmanuel solution. Overcome the problem with the answer, the bitterness with forgiveness, hate with love, and evil with good. By the way, that if you ever want a review on that, Romans chapter 13 deals exactly with that problem, with dealing with evil. Okay.
Can I get a question? Who wrote Job?
Who wrote Job? No idea.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
Well, this
it's
story is really like for all generations, for the angels and all of us. And why did God even bother speaking with Job about, Satan about it? I guess that's part of the story.
yeah. Well, and the thing is, Job reveals what's happening in heaven, which we would never know from being down here. Okay, and Job ultimately answers the question of why do the righteous suffer? Okay, and the answer is we don't get an answer. Okay, at the end of the whole thing, God finally comes to Job, and what is he answering? Does he tell him what happened in heaven? No. Does he tell him that he's been a good boy? No. He says, who are you to question me? I created the universe. I created the great sea monsters. Can you put the dragon on a leash and take him for a walk? Can you tame him for your daughter? Where were you when I created this and that and the other great things? And he goes on for like 3 or 4 chapters this way. Who are you to even ask why I did it? The question is, how can I conform to what God wants? Not why is He doing it?
Was God saying you don't know as much as you think you do? Trust me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm God, I'm in control, trust me. And that's the answer. It's trust, it's not understanding. We always want to understand. You know, Gentiles say, I need to understand in order to believe. I think it was Anselm that said, I believe in order that I might understand. And there's a lot of truth in that. When you start dealing with paradigm shifts or changing your worldview, you have a kind of a grid you put all your answers into here, but then some of the answers don't fit, and they start filling in holes in this grid over here, and eventually you see that you've got fewer holes here than you did here, and you do a switch over. And that's what happens when people become believers, is they've had to go through a paradigm shift where they quit seeing the world the way they grew up seeing it and see it in a new light.